Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for the attention. All right, so my name is Matilda. I'm a co-chair event at the HBS Alumni Angel of London, and we have a very exciting evening ahead of us about the global race for AI and machine learning leadership. 2 years after we first dived into the topic, we're revisiting to see whether AI is living up to its many promises. And we have an amazing lineup. You see it in front of you. So we're delighted that Kenneth Cukier, the senior editor at The Economist, has returned to moderate the panel, is joined by an esteemed panel of entrepreneurs, investors, policymakers, and advisors, all active in the AI space. So we're delighted that Sana Khareghani, the head of the UK Government Office for Artificial Intelligence, is here with us tonight. Steve Crossan, venture partner at First Minute Capital and former Google and DeepMind product manager. Dr. Marc Warner, CEO and co-founder of faculty who have applied AI to more than 300 projects. And Simon Greenman, a founder and partner in Best Practice AI, who just last week have been appointed to the World Economic Forum Global AI Council. Congratulations, Simon. So this evening is about understanding what is really happening in AI across startup companies, societies, and nations. With making money, where the real ethical and regulatory concern that exist today. Are China and the US the only contenders in the race for AI? And it is a case of the winner takes it all. Before I introduce our moderator in more details, a huge thanks to our sponsors, Taylor Wessing, without which we wouldn't be able to have this event tonight. And a big thanks to our volunteers team at the HBS organization. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our moderator, Ken Cukier. So he's a senior editor at The Economist, a co-author of Big Data, a New York Times bestseller translated in 20 languages, is an associate fellow at the University of Oxford's Zaid Business School and a trustee of Chatham House. In 2002 and 2004, he was a research fellow at Harvard Kennedy School of Government, is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Kenneth, floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much. So normally in a panel like this, I ask questions of the panelists. But this is not an ordinary panel. AI is too important to leave it to these clowns. I want to talk about the other clowns in the audience, not me, you. So normally, they're in the hot seat. Now, you're in the hot seat. Questions to you first. What do you want to know? Why are you here today? What is the most important thing on your mind? Shout it out first, on this side. That row. I'm looking at you. You. Come on, you came here. Why are you here? What is it?
I'm involved in an AI startup in Ireland, and I want to know why globally everybody is saying that US and China are so far ahead of the world when we are working with global companies, small startup, getting traction with service company boards.
Small companies relative to the large majors. What else? On this side. Go for it. Why are you here? Please. Okay, no way to regulate it. This side. There.
I want to know the fears and benefits of people impact of AI are real, economic, labor displacement, all that stuff.
Okay.
And if so, what's happening? Who's doing what about it?
People impact, you mean jobs?
Jobs, absolutely.
It's something else in people impact?
Jobs, careers, career change at scale.
Okay.
That's a subject near and dear to my heart.
Great. Another one?
How my business will be disrupted.
How my business will be disrupted?
My business will be
Oh, your business. What's your business?
Insurance.
Wow, good luck with that, honey. There.
I'd like to know what the state of the art is, because there's a lot of hype around AI at the moment.
Okay, please.
to expect over the next 5 years?
Next 5 years?
A bit related to what the gentleman there was saying, but should I worry about not having AI as being an AI as a career, as a job? If I'm in another industry, should I be moving towards this?
Okay.
AI in the context of privacy and ethics and the spread of that across different cultures globally and the different standards or different directions.
Okay. You know, we're all a bunch of old people who are sort of mid-career. It's not all of us, I mean, some are, but there's a spectrum of people here. Some people who are a little bit older, you know, looking at what it means and have a wealth of history to think about it. Other people are here who are younger, in fact, much younger, who might look at this with a different set of eyes. Let me invite a young member of audience, if the person would like to talk about what interests that person, if he would like to. His guardian can actually nudge him. Would he like to say what interests him? I'm gonna take the liberty of saying it's about jobs. It's what am I gonna do with my life? What am I gonna study? What am I going, and will I have a job? What will those jobs look like? And more importantly, will AI just rip through the labor market and create a sort of job apocalypse? With that, I'm going to turn to our esteemed, slightly esteemed enough panel and ask them that, am I going to sit down for this or am I going to be pacing? Let's see, if I'm not in my comfort zone yet, I'm going to be pacing. I like the adversarial nature. At this point, I am now your ally. I am the adversary of our panelists, trying to extract truth and knowledge. Let's see how that goes. I want a yes or no, jobs apocalypse. Starting with you, Simon, go.
No.
No.
Yes, then no.
Okay.
No.
Okay, so, Steve, either you know something that the others don't, or you're wrong. But you hedged. Everyone can hedge, yes but no.
No, yes, then no. Slightly different.
Okay, let's
So
hear.
yes, short term, no long term.
Okay, and isn't that a fudge?
No, don't think so.
Okay, so how long is this short term?
Well, I think 25 years, a generation.
Okay, so the lost generation.
Not necessarily lost, but troubled, challenged.
Troubled generation, okay. And how do you feel? I mean, you have to pay for these people. You represent the crown.
Yeah, so I'm not speaking for the whole crown today. I mean, I think that's probably fair. I don't know if I'd go as far as that, but I think that this is definitely going to affect people. It's going to affect a number of industries, not just insurance. It's going to disrupt everything. But I don't think it's going to affect jobs as quickly as people worry about either. Like, I think there's a lot more hype than it's worth at the moment. So I think we have a bit of time to do some thinking and to do some preparation.
And Simon, you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a sort of dystopian and a utopian view of this whole job thing, in that a lot of AI can actually get rid of a lot of the boring, mundane activities that we don't actually like doing. So there is an opportunity for AI to make our jobs more interesting in the midst
Boring
of
jobs
this.
like being a cab driver, working at a coffee shop, being a journalist. In other words, half of employment will go because it's mundane. I'll be on the dole, the cup in front of the Strand.
I think I would, echoing Simon, I'd say we're going to need the robots in the next 15, 20 years because we're facing a demographic challenge, especially in Europe and in other parts of the West. And I think, we're likely to be, by the late 20s, competing for who can offer the best deals to people coming from other countries to come and live in our countries to do the jobs that we no longer have the young people available to do. And we're going to need the robots to help. I now use the robots in a broad sense.
Al goes to the bots.
We need the software to help.
Okay.
What do you think are the things that in the next 25 years are going to go, but then will come back or will retrain? Is that the...
I don't think anything is going to go, but I think productivity in all sectors is going to go up enormously. Yeah. So we're going to be able to do a lot more things with the same or a modestly incremental number of people.
And that will lead to people not where does it come back? I guess.
I think it will reconfigure the labour market. So we'll be doing different sorts of things, and we'll probably be training our children and our grandchildren to do different sorts of things. 20 to 30 years from now. But in the 15-year horizon, I think we're gonna need quite a lot of automation in order to be able to keep all of us, especially us grey hairs, in the manner to which our parents' generation were accustomed.
Let me first go to the, before I delve into this a bit more, let me go to the audience and ask them, jobs apocalypse, yes or no? Those in favor who think, yeah, it's going to be a holy mess. Raise your hand. Okay, that looks like it's like 6.1% of you. For those of you who, I'm going to have undecideds as well. Those who say, no, not at all, I agree with the consensus, it's overblown, raise your hand. Okay. Those who are undecided, raise your hand. Do you think that you'd have a different answer if you didn't go to Harvard Business School? Asking for a friend. Okay. Let's delve a little bit deeper into it. In the advertising sector, the advertising industry is a shrinking business. If you are on it year by year, the size of the market grows. The size of the market that goes to the players declines because it's all being hoovered up by large web platforms, notably Facebook and Google. Amazon has made a huge play into it as well. But for the crumbs that are fought over by about another 800 companies, that's declining. That's in decline. Mm-hmm. So do you think when you look forward that it's kind of madness to be in a small startup company doing AI, that the gains will go to those people who have both the data and the technical competence, and that will lead to sort of an economy of scale that is really hard to get rid of?
No.
Well, you don't have to go one by one, but since, Steve, you start us off, Sana, as an optimist.
Why didn't you go first this time?
You were the one that convinced me that the dimension returns the data, so I should let you speak.
Yeah, I don't think that, I think that the big incumbents have a number of short-term advantages in a number of specific industries and verticals, but in general, I think history has shown that a small, well-organized set of people who care about a problem and who can care about a problem more than the big guys can always disrupt. And I think there are lots of examples of that happening.
This history will show is pleasant and nice, but if we were to talk, if it was literally a century ago, even a little bit earlier, maybe about 1890, but 1910, and we were talking about the oil and gas industry, we wouldn't say, oh yeah, I'm going to be a wildcatter in Texas. Yeah, let's go for it. No, I mean, there was economies of scale that went to being a large oil exploration and extraction firm. So isn't AI going to go the same way as oil and gas? You're nodding.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you sort of see the gold rush for AI, and there's so much of the profits and the values actually being created by the tech giants here. But the scale argument goes back to there's something of an AI data flywheel going on here. The more data you have, the bigger the data sets, the better your predictive modeling, the better your products. The better your products could be the insurance industry, you're offering better insurance products. The more customers you get, the more data. So you get into this sort of flywheel effect. But on top of that, there's also something, the talent flywheel effect as well, in that the talent, they are going to the larger companies. I mean, look at a DeepMind in this country, brought up in 2015, Steve, you were there, 30 people, so now 1,000 people, and it's paying, I think the average salary, if you look at their company reports, for about £280,000 a year. That's some pretty damn big scales behind it.
I'm not sure I agree with this data flywheel. If you look at the performance of any algorithm with more data, tops out. And so what that tells you is there's diminishing returns to that flywheel. So as you go longer and longer, you actually gain, you need 1 million pieces of data out here to do the same work as one piece of data here. That's exactly the opposite to the flywheel of something like Facebook, where every additional user makes the platform more valuable for all the existing users. So I actually think this is just like
network effects.
Sort of so this is so there are scale effects to data, there are not network effects, and also there's diminishing returns.
Mm-hmm. I would add to this. So I think I don't think the data point is entirely valid. So I think it depends on what you're doing. So some things, yes, a lot of data will help make the algorithms better. Sometimes it's really good and well curated data is what you need. In terms of will it be just the tech giants, I think I'll answer as my neighbor here did, and yes and no. So maybe initially, but not forever. So there are lots of things at work here. So for example, government's funding a lot of skills. So right now the big guys can pay for it, and the smaller companies have to grow it. But we are investing in skills. We're investing a lot into skills, and eventually, hopefully, that will grow the number of people, the supply, and so that supply and demand should start to match up a little bit better, meaning that more people have access to that. That will help. There is a lot of government review into data monopolies, right? So it's taken a while for governments to notice this and look at what this looks like. And there's been reviews that have recently come to bear, or that we have commissioned around how to deal with data monopolies and what potential answers to this might look like in the future. There are, the third thing I would add is just, again, I think looking backwards a little bit, is the ability to innovate and do something new and different. So when you're and this is something that HBS will teach you, which is big guys have trouble being very innovative, whereas a smaller company is much quicker. And given where we are in the land of regulation-friendly, loving countries, when new regulations come, hopefully to regulate AI in a better way than we're able to today, when they eventually do, your smaller companies are going to be able to adapt to that probably much more quickly because they don't have a set way of approaching a certain thing. And so,
echoing that, I think there's certainly some domains in which scale hurts. It doesn't help, notably health. Look at sort of DeepMind and Google's efforts in health, which have come a cropper as a result of fears about the scale of the organization that's looking after health data and has access to health data. As a quick anecdotal example, the deal that DeepMind did with the Royal Free, which got DeepMind into a lot of hot water, despite DeepMind having been very careful about how it did that deal. It was essentially the same deal as had already been done by 250 other companies previously, but none of them were owned by Google. And so there are domains in which I think scale hurts, and being small and nimble helps.
And I wonder one thing to the rest of the panel. So the other area that we are seeing is that the big guys are making the mistakes now, right? And they're making big mistakes, and they're paying for it in the media. And so the smaller, more agile startups are able to learn from that and do things better, more ethically, safely, basing themselves on new research. And I think that is another kind of factor in this.
But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Google is going to solve every problem, or Amazon, that sort of thing. There's plenty of opportunities for startups. But startups, to be successful and scale, are going to need to show sort of characteristics around one, a domain knowledge, deep data sets, and yes, there's a non-linear return at some point, and talent as well. And they're going to have to make sure they're not competing directly with the Google. So there's many, many startup opportunities for the UK. But data is, I think, critical to a lot of their success at this point.
In certain domains.
Yeah, in certain domains,
true.
yeah.
Yes, in other domains, not so much. And on the talent point, yes, these companies pay a lot of pay large salaries, but not everybody wants to work for these big companies, and that's increasingly true. Not everybody who currently works for those companies wants to work for those companies. I'm here to tell you, very large numbers of people would like to have a better opportunity of something that they feel is more aligned with, what they feel around mission and an opportunity and doing something with high impact in the world. And it's often the case that startups or smaller companies can offer that much more attractively than the big incumbents can.
You think regulation might be, regulation can be an asset, it can also be a liability.
I think it's more likely that strong regulations will make it harder for startups and entrench the existing companies rather than help, just because my experience of having to deal with things like GDPR is it's really, really hard as a startup, and it's actually relatively easy as a large company where you can just throw money at the problem. So I'm quite concerned that we don't try and regulate our way too strongly. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't regulate AI, but I think using that as a force to try and protect our startups is probably the wrong way to go about it.
I would definitely echo that about GDPR, which is a sort of, seems to be a case of wanting to do something about a problem, but actually the result is it doesn't really do anything about the problem and creates a lot of challenges. And rather than more regulation, in some areas we just need proper application of existing regulation. The most obvious one being, regulation about publishing and broadcasting. The incumbents have, I think there was an Economist article actually about this recently, but the Economist, maybe even penned by yourself. The incumbents have got away for a long, long time with this idea that they're a neutral content platform and therefore they shouldn't be regulated in the same way as the New York Times is or the BBC is. But that really shouldn't stand up anymore.
So what kind of regulation do we need that would be an enabler of AI? What's missing? Chris Hughes in the New York Times the other day said we need a data regulator, like we have a sort of telecoms regulator, like we have a
like the FCC.
Exactly.
When we have the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, that is a sort of very proto-regulator.
It's not a real regulator.
Well, it's not a right. So actually, I think that's the right answer. So it is the Centre. So we've created the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation in order to look at this question, right? To say what are areas that are falling between the cracks? What are things that we should be worrying about? What are our how do we analyze and anticipate what can happen next? And do these fit? Do these things fit within existing regulators, as in upskilling our existing regulators and in increasing their remit, will that cover it, or do we need to create a new regulator? So the Centre's remit at the moment is not to jump straight into saying we need a new regulator and this is where it needs to be, but is to explore some of these questions so that we don't stifle innovation, but we're not letting things run amok either, so we can kind of control a little bit what's happening and make sure that we're doing the right review.
I think regulation is right. We're on the precipice of regulation already stifling innovation. And the only reason why we're at a precipice is because AI doesn't really exist in any significant way in the economy and in industry, with the exception of technology platforms trying to recommend you shit, right? So where we're on the precipice of being stifled is in the area of explainability, right? We know that with deep learning techniques, we can get better performance but we don't know how it worked. We just know it worked better because we can validate it against ground truth.
Sometimes true.
Sometimes true. So we'll pick up on that in a second. So if I can have a medical image scan that can predict cancer, it could be more effective, but it can't explain how it got to that answer. It's not allowed. If I can make a loan, and I'm an insurance company, and I can be more effective on actually in this case on a policy, but bank as well, same regulated industries, that if I can't explain how the algorithm came to its conclusion, I'm not allowed to use it. So we're actually going to be dumbing down society in the case of financial services, in the case of insurance, in the case of healthcare, because we don't allow algorithms that can't explain how they got to their answers, even if we can validate those answers are better than the alternatives, the classical statistical approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think under GDPR today, the Article 22 actually says for fully automated decisions involving individuals that have legal effect, then it has to be explainable. So to your point, employment decisions, medical decisions, and things like that. And the problem is that you look around, and we did a bit of a sort of map of all these ethical principles and frameworks. There's so many of them that are out there at the moment. But the big challenge is how do you actually turn that into something that's operationalizable on a daily basis for people in working with AI? So to your point, what does it mean to actually be explainable? And that is a very subjective terminology. So you're asking AI engineers, machine learning engineers, to make something explainable, but what's understandable, explainable to you might not be explainable to me. And so it's really ambiguous.
This is actually a different argument, though. It's not a normative or epistemological one of, are you smart enough to understand how it came to its conclusion? It's, is how it came to its conclusion knowable at all?
Yeah, and I'm going to defer to some of my expert colleagues on this one, because there's a whole science of explainability.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a whole science of explainability because we're not there yet. Yeah. So, Steve, but you said sometimes, and Mark, you do this for a living.
We're going to come in with something first.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, go ahead.
Okay, on the I think, I don't know, I'd be interested to hear what you've got to say about this as well, but I think explainability is a bit of a red herring for two reasons, I think. First of all, it's, in practice, a lot less of a problem than people claim it to be. In that, in fact, you can probe why neural networks have made the decisions that they've made. You can probe them. In some ways, they're, in some formats, they are more understandable than a traditional long piece of software that has previously been making a decision which is built of a bunch of heuristics, which is very hard to debug.
And for the record, certainly more explainable than a human brain.
Yeah, I was just going to say, or your doctor's, your prescription.
And often more explainable than how a human has made it. And the second reason is that we have a long history of dealing with these sorts of systems which are kind of black box in some sense, where we don't necessarily understand the full detail of what's going on. This happens in the aviation industry. It happens in.
But as you know, that's been. I don't want to belabor the point, but though that history referring to is not the modern variant of AI like deep learning. It's actually programmed instructions by a human making it, or an expert system that you can actually unwind the heuristic or the rule set. It's not a heuristic; it's a rule set of how it came to its conclusion.
Yes, but typically, in fact, in the aviation industry and in other safety-critical industries, the regulatory approach is not to do that, to say you have to be able to understand line by line what's going on in the code. The approach is to say you have to, when in creating that system, you have to have gone through a set of procedures, including a set of test procedures which you can point to and document, and which we can come and audit that you went through all of the test procedures, which demonstrated that under a very wide range of circumstances, such and such an outcome came about. So there are lots of in industry, the idea of tolerance of a cable to a particular tensile strength, for example, is not based on a detailed understanding of what's going on at a molecular level inside that cable. It's based on testing, and so I think there are ways around this explainability problem which are I think it's less of a challenge than people think it is.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would basically campaign for almost the total opposite perspective to most people have on this question, which is since Homo sapiens existed, so 200,000 years, we've had these terribly biased decision-making machines that have been black box, and we can just prove have made bad decisions for almost all of that time. For the first time in the whole of human history, we get the chance to get decisions made on paper in a way that we can systematically improve. Even if they're not perfect to begin with, we can systematically improve. That is such an incredible opportunity for progress. And everyone, almost everyone, is approaching this with totally the wrong attitude of, oh my God, this is going to destroy everything. No. This is our opportunity to fix some of the problems that have been absolutely corrupting our society forever. And actually, these are technical problems. So we know how to, we can take an algorithm, we can take an insurance algorithm, we can test it for fairness. There's a few definitions of fairness. Test it for all three, decide which makes most sense. We don't think we should be doing that. But if you decide which fairness you want to build, we can just make it fair according to that definition. You sacrifice a little bit in accuracy, you gain a lot in sort of the ethical dimension. Explainability offers an unbelievable opportunity to do science in sort of a new way. So we have these incredible algorithms that can find correlations in data sets that no human could ever get. With the latest set of explainability algorithms, we can train algorithms on these enormous data sets and then ask, what patterns are you spotting? Of course, because of the kind of deep learning technology we have at the moment, it doesn't really contain any notion of causality. So it's only correlations that it picks out. But then a human can look at those and start trying to figure out the model that explains those correlations, and then actually do a science on a level that no one's ever been able to do before. Like, this is just basically, now, that is not to say that like any powerful tool, it can be used for ill purposes. So it's not a campaign to say that there should be no regulation, simply that this is a wonderful opportunity.
Can I just make a comment on this? So I think it's so a couple of things. So I think it's necessary right now for us to go through this, because explainability is kind of a way for us to, we attribute that to trust, right? Like if I can explain why the thing did the thing that it did, I can trust it, and then I can hold it accountable, right? Once you start to move away from that, right? Once we start to believe that a cable of this strength will hold up the bridge that I'm going to drive my family across, then you start not caring whether or not, you can explain why the bridge is being held up. You just believe it. We all get on a plane. None of you, I wager, there might be a few, who can explain why the plane. I'm floored every time that amount of metal can make it up into the sky. So it's a necessary step for us to go through. I will add to what Marc just said, though. I don't 100% agree that this is just a technical problem. Now, I also am a techie. So I've got a tech background. I did spend most of my life doing technical stuff and some business stuff, and I'm now in policy. But I don't think that this is fairness, explainability, trust. I don't think is all a technical problem. I think it has ethical problems. It's got social aspects. It's got cultural problems. It's got societal and impact, and all of that needs to come together in order to then get us to a place where we think something is fair or not fair, or we're willing to trust it or not trust it. And I think that will really depend, like everything else in artificial intelligence and these technologies, on the specific case that we're speaking about.
So let's actually delve down into some of these specific cases. What are the most exciting things, the most exciting applications that are running live today that you've come across? I invite Simon, because I want to pick on him.
Most exciting?
Yeah, most interesting, exciting, surprising.
Yeah, I mean, we did best practice AI. We sort of mapped out a whole landscape of use cases of what's going on with AI, because it's actually quite hard to understand what AI is in a business context. It's almost like it's a blank canvas and people painting their pictures. So what we were seeing here is that AI is almost, it's an enabling tool that's being applied in so many different places for prediction problems. So you're finding AI is being used in human resources to help predict which candidates should hire and not hire. It's being helped in marketing, which customers are going to churn. It's being used in medical diagnosis, or about to be used in medical diagnosis, to determine what type of disease you have. So it's a real sort of prediction machine that's going on across organizations. Now that's kind of, on one level, it's kind of boring because it's sort of a small point solutions, repeatable task. But what AI starts to get really exciting is it's almost like a superpower in that you can do things at speed and scale and scope that you can't do
But can you
before.
pick out one thing? We know, healthcare, but
Yeah.
it actually turns out that there's only about 13 or 14, depending on how, I haven't looked at the data as of about 2 months ago,
Yeah.
but there's about 13 FDA-approved AI
Yep.
devices or therapies, right? And interestingly, the algorithm is frozen in place. So this idea of the flywheel or learning from the feedback,
Yep.
it doesn't learn. It's not allowed to. You'd have to reapply as an
Yep.
upgrade to the algorithm. So the whole system is actually dumbed down by regulation. But nevertheless, there's only 13 of them. So is there one thing that you would point to say, wow, this is being used, that's so interesting?
Yeah, two. DeepMind just launched with, or Google just launched with Moorfield Hospital, approved by the regulators to help diagnose retinopathy. That was exciting to me. Yep. Second thing is, and this is scary, is surveillance society, which is, Chinese with 200 million cameras can basically see and identify people in the whole country in real time.
Okay.
I've got a couple as well. So one is from government. So let me find my example so I'm telling you the right thing. In DFID, which is the Department for International Development, they created a project called Grid 3, and this was created with the University of Southampton. They're using ML algorithms on satellite imaging, looking at settlement boundaries, transport networks, waterways, lighting facilities, etc., to actually correctly or very accurately determine the population of a certain region that's so remote that you can't actually get to, and this is helping policymakers make better decisions on how to plan public services, intelligent targeting for resources, but also census. So how many people do we have, and how do we measure that? So that's quite exciting and interesting, and it's leads to many things in the future. And another one, maybe more consumer level, is there's a couple of startups really interesting. One around it looks at routing angry people who call a call center to call center employees who have the wherewithal or ability to deal with them, so that you are helping your call center employees not deal with very angry employees if they really can't do that. So that it has an enormous effect on the positivity of a job like, where you're often a bit worried about picking up the phone. And the last one I'll give is in fashion or retail, where there's a small startup here in the UK where they, by taking a picture of yourself, they can show you in any clothing that's on sale at H&M, wherever, right? So you pick the store, you pick the clothing, you send them a picture of yourself. They can show you in that outfit, and with a bit more work, where if they were integrated directly with the retailer, they could also show you that outfit moving on you, and so for people who shop online, this is one of the reasons people don't shop online, or women don't generally, because they like to touch and feel fabric and imagine what that might look like. And if you can watch it in a video, watch yourself walking around in a video, that gets you one step closer to being able to do those things. So these are really exciting, tangible things, and I've got a bunch more. And best practice AI's got loads, so get on their website and check them out.
There are a lot that I could mention. A couple of areas. One is drug discovery and drug repurposing. There's a lot of activity in that at the moment. The UK is at the forefront of it. There are many kind of great startups, some very early on, some more mature now, that are doing this and are actually having effect. They are bringing drugs to trial, which didn't exist before. That's starting to happen now.
But how are they using AI? Like, what's the AI quotient in that? They're taking a drug that's been approved for one element but not for another. They're testing it with AI for that element.
That's right. There are a variety of approaches, in fact, but a sort of canonical approach, you might say, is doing essentially chemistry in silico. Okay. Which in fact has been something that's been done for a long time with
for a while.
With molecular dynamics simulators, but now with modern AI, it's possible to make those simulations much more powerful, much more accurate, much more fast, and so you can get through much more data. But there are a variety of different approaches, some of which are just purely literature approaches, textual approaches, which is where Babylon AI started, for example.
Right. Marc, I've not been overwhelmed. To be honest, help me out here. Tell me something that's going to knock me off my feet.
So what do you count as exciting? Is it the impact or is it the technology?
I'm tempted to tell you the advice that an old editor at the Wall Street Journal told me when I was a very young journalist. It's a bit off color, but we're friends here. It's not being recorded. He says, Cukier, there's two kinds of stories. No shit and holy shit. So, then they were mine. Yeah. So I'll hit you up with two things that I'm exercised about. One, Recursion Pharmaceutical, Salt Lake City, is basically doing something similar to what you're suggesting. Is they're basically reinvented the scientific method. And they're using 3 different innovations of AI altogether to find new drugs. What they're doing is they're looking for ailments, typically genetic ailments, so you can actually, there's sort of a ground truth to what the problem is, but you don't know how to solve it, like ALS. So they're taking drugs that are in the category of being able to work a little bit in areas, but you would actually have to sort of do trial and error experiment to get it. First innovation is in the hypothesis. They don't have any hypothesis. They throw the kitchen sink at it. They don't know what's going to work, so it's a machine learning algorithm that basically starts from scratch, pretty much. The next one is robotic pipetting, right? They're privately held. You can't invest in them yet. So the great innovation is before you had grad students, really just 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and even 10 years ago, working in a wet lab, which is how you want to do it, by actually having to measure in the compounds and actually running the experiment. But here you can run the experiment with a robot, basically with these massive planks of basically 1,000 Petri dishes all at once, and you've got thousands of these thousands. So they're running roughly about 1 million experiments a week, right, on this. And then the third innovation is machine learning, of image recognition. And that was the biggest one. Before you actually needed the person, the human being, of course, this is just 5 years ago, to look in a microscope and analyze and count, say, if there's more white blood cells than red blood cells to determine what the effect of the medication was. That was tedious. Just to look at a single sample might have taken 4 hours, right? Here, it's all done in a fraction of a second through a machine learning algorithm. So what it's able to do by doing, say, trial and error of different compounds and reagents at scale, at this algorithmic scale, is it's able to identify new knowledge in that search space or that solution space that never could have been found before unless you either got lucky or you had 100 years, right? And if you take that one methodology across lots of other problems that can be transformed in that way, we're going to unlock new knowledge than we never could before. Small second thing is, just last week, some research came out in terms of breast cancer. And what they found was, at MIT, they were able to take mammograms, and they looked for whether it was cancerous or not, the tissues were cancerous or not. That's been done, of course, now for 5-10 years. Like we've broken that, and we just have to sort of optimize it and get there. But then what they did is they looked at those same patients years later to find out whether it was cancer or not, and then retrain the algorithm. It's deep learning, okay? Don't have causality. So now it's not that they're trying to detect cancer. They're predicting cancer that is otherwise undetectable by a human being. That is incredible. Right? And if that has, just in the last few days, has opened up my mind and my imagination to say, hey, we thought we were looking at this, we're really looking at this in terms of what the potential is.
Absolutely. One last holy shit moment, which is, if you haven't seen it already, go and look up David Beckham speaking Mandarin.
Yeah.
Which is also a London-based company. And that whole space, which is the space of generative models, that is going to be big in your life in the next 5 years.
So I'm so glad you dropped the M word for Mandarin, because that brings up the issue of China, AI powerhouse. America, AI powerhouse. Europe, a little AI power mouse. What is the role of, I didn't plan that just came to me. So that's why I stand up. So what is the role of that small little continental entity known as Europe, and of that small little island that's no longer even part of Europe called Britain? Does this beautiful, cherished idea of Europe have any role in the world of AI in which you've got the prowess of North America, bring the Canadians into it, not because Santa's Canadian, but because of the flame of deep learning being put forward by those in Montreal and elsewhere, in Toronto. And China, which is investing so much that they want to actually dominate it. Where is Europe? Where is Britain?
You were just in China.
It's pointing at me. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about this, right? And I think it's really important to recognize that let's zoom back into the UK and not broader Europe and say in our small bit of Europe, we have 2 of the top 10 institutional world universities, right? The internet.
4 of the top 25.
4 of the top 25. We have the internet was invented here. The computer was invented here. So, I mean, this is the home of research, the leading home of research and innovation.
About Babbage.
I am talking about, I think it's important. Yes, but it's still important.
It's a computer. He never built it.
I still think it's important to recognize that the innovation started here and the thinking started here, and that there is, given I'm Canadian, and Geoffrey Hinton, who is leading machine learning, is British. But the key is that the thinkers are here, and I think what Britain has to do better and the UK has to do better is taking that innovation and being able to do more with it, and we've got the right people on the panel that can talk more about that.
Yes.
and how we do that better. But I think that that is here. That's one. The second is we care about safety and ethics, and that is the basket. So that isn't my term, but it is it. So if you're talking about putting your eggs in a basket, you shouldn't be putting your eggs in. This is the whole of the basket. So if we are able to lead the way in the thinking and the research that underpins ethical and safe AI and responsible AI, then this is it.
Okay, so Europe will be the sort of the vanguard of responsible, safe AI, and China and America will make all the money by selling unsafe AI.
Would you, as the public, want that? Like, I mean, there is the point. You need to adopt these technologies. Right, you do need to adopt these technologies at the end of the day.
But ultimately, I mean, I've actually relatively recently come around to the idea that at least from a sort of robustness and explainability point of view, fundamentally you cannot do AI kind of long term without them. So I actually don't buy that you can separate them in some meaningful way. So we'll concentrate on explainable and robust AI. I mean, privacy, I think, is privacy and fairness are a slightly different matter. But like ultimately, your deep learning algorithm can fit to very weird patterns in your data that can lead to basically adversarial exploitation. So if you want it to work really well in the real world long term, it has to be explainable, it has to be robust. Yeah. So I just don't think it makes sense to say that we're going to ever get this opportunity to do that. Like America and China, maybe they don't realize it quite yet. I mean, Google does, I'm sure. Steve knows better than I do, but like they will just dominate that as well because it's the only way of doing it. Like you say, there's not going to be an unsafe, unrobust set of algorithms that people are going to buy. It's just going to sort itself out. So I don't really think you can legislate those two things separately. So I think that's going to be a big problem.
Let me leave aside for the moment the example of you need to fuse robustness and safety into AI for the purpose of being able to sell it effectively and commercialize it. Maybe right, maybe not.
Or use it effectively.
Yeah, or use it effectively. Let's put it aside. China, I mean, the bigger stakes are China and America versus what is the role of Europe and Britain in particular. Simon and Steve, go.
I mean, I worry about this. I worry that Britain, our ambition is not big enough here. I think AI is fundamentally a scale game. You look at China, the regulatory environment, the relationship between government and corporations in terms of sharing data, the focus on societal control and surveillance. You look at the American tech giants that have just got a massive scale. Then Europe, it's right, we have a history, the UK has a history of a good legal system, ethical behaviour. But as Mark's saying, it's basically table stakes. That gets us perhaps a seat at the table. It's necessary but not sufficient. But what is the UK's mission around AI? What is it that we can do between government and industry to create something massive and big here, revolutionary in AI? I think healthcare is a really exciting area to look at. I think financial services, where we have a density is demand. I don't think it's necessarily a separation between government and the private sector here. There are examples, and Mariana Mascuto over at UCL talks about the government and private sector working together. But things like natural language processing. The UK's research in natural language processing is absolutely world-class, and we have a scale and density around this.
Who's going to win, China or America, and what does winning look like?
Okay.
Why don't I free associate, and then you guys can sort of collect your thoughts and then tell me why I'm wrong, okay? All right. So I think that there's going to be two ecosystems will form. One will be a democratic and laissez-faire, i.e. commercial first AI system that's going to be pioneered by America. And then there's going to be, I'll call it the authoritarian capitalist version of AI from China. Just as we've had in the 20th century two spheres of influence with politics in terms of the Cold War, we'll have two economic spheres of influence. One which is going to be, the Western American-led, and Europe's going to be belly aching all the way through because it's going to be sort of uber alles for Facebook and Google and for deploy first, ask questions later, more or less. And then there's going to be China, which is going to export its variant of AI and algorithms to all of these other smaller countries, a little bit like during the Cold War, where you had three blocks. You had the first world, the second world, and the third world. The third world was the non-aligned nations, but you can't be a non-aligned nation. What does that mean in the world of AI? Are you going to, if you are the Congo, are you not going to have good health care with robotic surgery? No, you're going to either choose the Chinese sphere of influence or the American sphere of influence. And this is going to be what the world will look like. I'm going to give you a date, around 2060.
It's a category error.
Great.
It's a category error to suggest that AI is either like oil or like nuclear weapons.
And I said neither of those, but please, I invite you to explain.
But you used the term arms race.
I only meant it, I don't know if I did, but if I did, I just meant it metaphorically, race. Let's not talk about arms. We're here to talk about business. Go to Chatham House if you want to talk about arms.
Sure.
Okay.
What I mean to say, though, is that there's something that is fundamentally different about AI and software technology, first of all, compared to a resource like oil, which is to say that it's not a scarce resource. We're not going to run out of AI. In fact, the opposite is happening. We are as we create more AI, we are proliferating more AI. And in fact, the time to commoditization of an AI technique is shrinking with every month that goes past. So one of the, I'm sure you know this better than me, but one of the big factors in AI is that everybody publishes. Everybody publishes everything. So as soon as somebody comes up with everything, with something, there are 5 different open source versions of it on GitHub within a week.
Okay, this is jolly interesting, but it doesn't actually get me closer to China versus America. I'm going to actually go to these guys, because I think maybe they can help me out here. Let's first start with a question, and I think maybe we'll frame it this way. Is China going to supersede America, or the West, I'll say America predominantly, as an AI powerhouse, defining and leading the standards and doing the pioneering cutting edge work? Or will it be America? And we should probably have a third variant, which will be, there will be a constant rivalry between the two, and it's not going to be pretty. They're not going to really cooperate. They're going to actually probably be, inimical to each other. But someone's going to question my framing. Go for it.
How many people speak Mandarin in the room?
Others, 1, 2.
Is that the answer to the question?
How so?
How do we know if we don't speak it?
Well, no, I mean, there's lots of, that's true, but people in China don't have to speak English to know that America's a powerhouse, and they can look at published research, they can look at what's being deployed, et cetera. Let me just get a quick show of hands to get a sense of the room, and then, you guys are going to be the moderator. I'm going to sort of sit down, and you guys can ask the questions. So first, who thinks that actually the future for AI belongs to China? Raise your hand. It's what, maybe about 15% of you, 20% of you. Who thinks that actually no way, America's dominance is going to be maintained? Raise your hand. That's probably maybe less, I think. The rest are undecideds. Is that by acclamation? Yeah, undecideds. Or neither. Oh, yeah, sorry. What's the third variant, which is constant rivalry, constantly tension, not pretty? That's less still. Okay, but more people have put their hands up to China than to America. Yeah.
We're also making the assumption that AI is not cross-border.
Yeah, I was going.
We're
Yeah.
differentiating between China and the US, but there's so much cross-pollination between the technology.
Sure, but let's, okay, so what does success look like? Let's think about this. So if you're the Minister of Health in the Congo, and you have to buy an AI system for all of your health care, it's going to be by Baidu or it's going to be by Google, right? You're not going to buy both.
Yeah, but is the question economic or technology dominance?
Well, I mean, it's true. I mean, I didn't define exactly in that sense what it means to win AI. I think we're going to have to. It's a little bit of both. It's going to be politics as well. Spheres of influence.
Can I say something
here?
Yeah. There's something else in here, right? So the researchers, the people who are actually creating this, right? I think Steve said this earlier. They may not want to work for Baidu or Google, right? They want to do something more and more. What we're seeing is that what's driving the younger people, and I would love the younger person who's in the room, I can't see, say this, but is that actually what's driving people to these solutions is big global challenges. So why is it that it's one country versus another and not the technology that wins or the researchers that win or come together to use AI to serve global problems like UN SDGs?
That's
like, why is it a race, economic race?
Well, that's true, but it sort of is. If you look at what's going on right now in China versus America through the venture capital funding and through the company creation, there is a real competition going on. And of course, there's people who are leaving that to sort of do their sort of data for good projects, but there's still, it doesn't obviate the fact that there's a competition going on. Let me do this. I see some show of hands. Why don't I ask for about a minute or two a couple of views, as succinct as you can make it, about the China, US, Europe rivalry, and then we go right into questions to the panel from you all. So who has a comment on this? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We'll start here.
I was just going to say on your point that you also have to look at the politics of it all. So if you have a look at China's investment outside of China in Asian countries and in sub-Saharan countries as well, I want to mention Huawei. So Huawei is implemented in 170 countries, and if you look at the countries that it's implemented in and where has China invested in, a lot of those countries, there's a correlation there. So it is largely to do with like policy and politics as well. That was just my only comment to kind of mention.
Go for it.
I believe we are missing the point of the impact of regulation on this race. I believe that on the Western side, it's mostly about trying to limit or control the negative side of AI, whereas in China, it's mostly about promoting or favoring the world dominance in business and in economy.
Okay, great. There was, raise your hand again so that, yeah, please, thank you.
I would just say this is less of a question as to whether the Chinese algorithms, so to speak, or the American algorithms will prevail, as you gave in the Congo example. It's not so much whether they will buy the algorithm from Baidu or from Google. It's more of a question of how they're going to approach data gathering, surveillance, and the overall governance of the infrastructure on which that hypothetical AI will operate. And this has nothing to do with the rivalry in algorithms or in technical sophistication. That has to do more with the actual governance of the country. And so we actually go back to the sort of the old spheres of influence debate as to whether it's going to be the Chinese or sort of Asian sphere of influence or the Western sphere of influence. Because as one of the speakers said, most of the algorithms are likely to be on GitHub within a week of their publishing or their development, if GitHub still exists at the time.
That is today. We'll see in the future. But let's bring it along. I see 1, and then 2, and then 3.
Hi. I wanted to make the distinction between AI and machine learning. So, in the machine learning space, we're building algorithms that optimize for a certain thing. So the way that I view it is that the person that can create the algorithm that optimizes best is best placed to win, unless you have some form of protectionism around that. And that leaves room for people to come and disrupt. So if a small startup can build an algorithm to optimize something much better than either the US or China has, then there is room for adoption. When you get into real artificial intelligence, that's probably a different conversation.
Okay, great, thanks. Why don't you pass it along to the gentleman here, and then we'll go back.
Yeah, I think the parallel to the telco industry debate that's going around with Huawei today, and I think that comes back to not whether it's AI, but the use case in which the AI is being used. So in the context of, say, telco infrastructure, AI is going to be completely geopolitical. In the context of testing my individual diabetes status with a blood, prick of the thumb, you could buy 49% from the U.S. and 51% from China, and it doesn't make a difference. So I think it's a matter of looking at what the use case is for the specific AI application.
Okay, gentlemen, just pass it right behind you. Yeah, go for it.
You talked about it as a race. If needs lead to innovation, isn't it about the society that develops the fertilized ground for it to be rewarded rather than a society that tries to constrain it? So if you're trying to protect jobs as opposed to rewarding productivity, for example, that's what will drive who succeeds and who wins in a inverted commas race. And I'm actually interested, I don't know if you're going to cover this, which is the talent flow, which at the moment is flowing to where money is rather than where society's problems are. And that flow is happening globally and is going to short-term productivity gains as opposed to what might be a long-term gain for a wider group. So again, the same thing, the role of government and who will lead that.
Great, thanks. There's a gentleman right behind you there. Great.
Related to the point about use cases, I think it will be sectorally different. An example where China has the advantage is facial recognition, where there's limited regulation, huge government drivers. So SenseTime and Face++ are the two best companies in the world in that. Where the West will have an advantage is English language NLP, probably, where Amazon and Google have a huge amount of data and technical advantages.
Great. This will be the last point on China and the US, and then we're going to open it up for questions, unless this is a general question. No, you have to wait. A rare breed.
As a GDPR lawyer with an American accent, there was a lot of GDPR bashing going on earlier. Nobody's talking about it as an advantage in this AI race. And I think there's a good reason for that. So and I think it comes back to the point about governance and data gathering and what is going to be the differentiator, between a Chinese model where there won't be that regulatory constriction or attitude, a U.S. model where there may or may not, depending on how the CCPA takes root or not. But certainly no one's loving it here in Europe. And it's not just those of us that are here. It's affecting how anyone around the globe is dealing with our personal data when it comes to developing all this.
Let me a quick show of hands before we move on, which is surveillance and China. Simon evoked the S word. We know that there's reports say that there's 1 million Uyghurs right now in re-education camps in Western China. And facial recognition is all over the provincial capital. It looks pretty bad, right? And it makes one wonder, is that, and we know that China's also selling the algorithm to other countries. Ecuador is using it for law enforcement. It's been trialed in Germany and it's been trialed in Britain. Okay, what do you guys think? Who here is sort of deeply worried about the role of surveillance in AI, where every face is a barcode, versus those who think we've been there before and we can just sort of see our way through it, business as usual? Who here is petrified? Raise your hand. Okay, a little bit less than half. Who here says business as usual? Less. Okay, a little bit less. And who here not sure yet? Yeah, a bit more. All right, let's do this. Great. Let's open it up to questions. Who's got the first one? I think what we'll do is, depending on the question, we might invite either one person or ask the person who it is, a bunch of the panelists. So we'll say answers as quickly as possible so we can get more questions. Or what we might do is collect a couple of questions, then bring it back to the panelists. But start off. I see a question here. We'll go with that one as a first one.
Sorry, just coming back to the job apocalypse. We came to a conclusion about whether there will be one and whether there won't be one. In the event that there is one, is there anything underway at the government or private sector level you can point to that'll deal with the apocalypse?
Yeah. Sana, how are you going to deal with the jobs apocalypse?
So I personally, no, I'm just. So there are programs. So the Chancellor's spoken about the National Retraining Scheme, and there's quite a lot of money going in and investment going into the National Retraining Scheme, and we are working with colleagues across DWP, HMRC. DFE, it's a big cross-Whitehall initiative in terms of looking at things such as future of work and the types of skills and retraining schemes that we need in order to help underpin that. So there's definitely thinking going on, and we know across the US and Europe more broadly as well, these are areas that are being looked at and investigated by governments to try and get ahead of this. Because there's things that we can do as government, but I think crucially in this isn't a government-only issue. We need to work really closely with the private sector in delivering this. So in terms of reskilling and upskilling. So a lot of the work that we do with the private sector in terms of adoption is to ensure that thinking in terms of reskilling of their own workforce goes in from the outset rather than previously in terms of other kind of adoption of other technologies. It was an afterthought. So we've now done this. What are we going to do? Because AI is disrupting the whole business pipeline, so the whole operations. So the thinking is now to start doing that thinking about retraining of your workforce from day one.
Good. I'm going to leave it at that. There's one there and then there. Great.
You were talking about kind of killer applications for AI earlier, and you were saying you weren't excited, blown away by any of them. Do you know of anyone who's really investing in AI to develop software? And I'm not talking about very esoteric software. I'm talking about business software. In a world where instead of spending 100 million on SAP for your new finance system, you show an algorithm all the input finance transactions, all the outputs, and it learns how to represent the general ledger, right? I mean, could this be the app? And is that an area where, could we see software being grown rather than written in future? If software is highly rules-based, human beings are pretty terrible at writing bug-free software. Is a lot of investment going there?
You know more about the investment. I perhaps know more about the...
Well, Marc's business is doing this.
So we work with all kinds of businesses to help them use AI internally. There's a huge amount of work that's going into things like automated fraud detection in sort of audit and various spaces like that. There's quite a lot of work that people are thinking about, or at least the examples we know personally, people are thinking about how to do some mapping between transactions and sort of do more accountant-like finance things. But ultimately, at the moment, the great value in that seems just to be to getting the data systematized. So most of the work that I know of personally is focused mainly around just making sure various things are interoperable and giving the big consultancies easy way of uploading from 10 different accountancy packages. But I mean, it seems like a pretty obvious use case once you've done that and you have a load of data available to then, and this is actually what we pitched the company, they weren't ready for it yet, but to start looking for uncommon patterns in accounts, fraud in particular, things like that.
Great, good. The mic is over there, and there was a gentleman back there first. Let's do that, and then we'll go to the gentleman here. Please.
It's back on the jobs apocalypse, and it's somewhat related to what Sana said. Is just your two options was, is there or won't there be a jobs apocalypse? I think that's very hard to predict, but it's fairly clear that work is going to change a lot. And there's a lot of very big companies that are already investing a huge amount of money. I think Sana's answer about what the UK government is doing about that is a good one. I was just interested in the panel's reaction to change versus apocalypse or not.
Yeah. I think there will be a lot of change, and I think change can be disruptive. Often sort of tech utopians like to quote the fact that, you know, in the 1880s, still 80% of people in the UK still worked on farms, and, you know, a generation or two later, they didn't, and there was more employment and more people had jobs and there was more wealth. But there was a lot of disruption in between, you know, including a couple of big world wars. And so we should take this stuff, I think, seriously.
It wasn't the whole farming industry wasn't so good if you were a horse.
Yeah, it wasn't good for horses. No, that's true.
So maybe the humans are the modern horse in that example. Exactly.
That may be true. I think there are going to be serious transformational issues in society. A lot of those are much more complicated than I think we've even started to think about. They're also to do with lots of areas where we're going to be missing people to do jobs, as I was kind of briefly touching on earlier.
Can you give us one example of where we might be missing, where we might miss people to do jobs?
We're already massively missing carers and nurses, and
all right.
You know, that's only going to get worse.
Fair enough. Great. There's two questions here. This gentleman was one there, and then I want to get these people on this side. Please.
Hi there. I just wanted to ask, and one of the things I'm terrified about is implicit bias, and where it exists in data sets and is being transferred over to AI across sort of all sectors, HR, healthcare. Could you perhaps speak to that a little bit?
So I think there's sort of, this question has to be divided into two parts. So once the problem is well formed, as in you understand the application, you understand the categories you want to protect and make sure you're fair against, once you have the data, that's a maths problem, and that can actually be answered, right? We pretty much understand that basically totally. There's a sort of problem before that, which is spotting situations like this, spotting that the data set might be biased in some weird ways, and framing it fully as a technical problem. That bit is more complicated, and I don't think anyone would claim to be able to do it everywhere. But I would go back to my previous point that we'd certainly know for sure that human brains are terrible at this. The first few sets of algorithms can be made somewhat fair, and like we can be careful about this, but this is a really solvable technical problem. Like I just don't think there's any long-term concern. Like in 15 years, we really can be at the point where that's just we don't have bias in our algorithms.
Sana, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, can I just say something? I agree. If we manage one massive problem that we have today, which is diversity in our technical people, right? We need to really be pushing forward. This is a massive problem. So not just gender diversity, but ethnicity, representing the society that the algorithm is serving. And if we want to remove that bias going forward, we need to make sure that the people who are creating these algorithms are diverse. Right now, 2 of every 10 AI technicians, or whatever you want to call them, are female. So not even talking about kind of other ethnicities and diversity BAME and other things like that. So we need to address this. This is a massive problem. So if we want to make sure that and I agree that if we've got all of the rules right, then it is a technical problem, but the technicians themselves, the technologists themselves bring inherent bias into this, so we need to make sure that that is represented.
I'd say actually, I think I don't fully agree. So I think it is super important to have the first set of people be diverse. Once it's framed as a technical problem, actually anyone can do maths, right? That doesn't require anything, like that can be done by anyone. And so actually this is maybe a bit more solvable than one might hope, because you don't need to be a detailed technical expert. Basically one person needs to figure out the algorithm to make something fair, and then that can be applied across the board. But everyone needs to figure out circumstances where we might be unfair. So we actually need more diverse translators, right? Because this is a software problem that can scale very effectively. So I'm sort of slightly more optimistic that we can build fair software scale that very effectively, but we definitely need.
Is there a subtlety though in what the two of us are saying? So if you're
I think
solving
we're agreeing.
I agree. I wonder though if there's like if I'm solving a problem, right, and my life model differs from yours, right, and if I'm solving that problem, that solving of that problem needs to have a diverse data set, and we've seen lots of diverse representation, right? So we've seen lots of problems where this hasn't been the case, and it's led to problems, right?
100%. Well, I don't think we're very good at the technical part at the moment
either. Yeah.
We're screwing both of them up at the moment. I'm just hopeful that this one can scale better because it can be made into software.
Yes.
Before we move on, I want to invite the questioner to see if she wants to come back in on this.
I think. I don't think there's any part that says this would happen naturally or without regulation or without very specific effort. I mean, I think I totally agree with that. It's simply that. So there is a set of existing regulations that say, you're not allowed to hire people based on their protected characteristics, right? That should absolutely be true of algorithms. At the moment, there is actually, as people, I forget, who it was saying earlier, that there aren't easy tools for data scientists to even check their algorithms are fair. That's totally terrible. And we spent a huge amount of time and money and effort building tools so that now data scientists can click a button, be like, is this algorithm fair? And so then can actually start thinking about these ethical questions. And, as I said earlier, I actually don't think they should be making the ethical decision. I think that should come from broader society or the business or whatever. But if you give them a definition of fair, then they can now have the tools. We're starting to get to the place where they can have the tools to make things fair. But I don't think that comes with no effort. And actually, we do see that it degrades the predictive quality of algorithms. So actually, I think it's very unlikely to happen totally naturally because companies will have a profit incentive to do the accurate but unfair thing rather than the slightly less accurate and fairer thing. So I think it definitely should be regulated. It's important. I guess I'm only trying to say that this is a solvable problem that's within our grasp, that if we push for it, this is something we can do. It's not this dystopian future where there's nothing we can do about it.
We're pressing up against time. This is what I'd like to do. There's a lot of people who've got questions, and we're not going to have a chance to get to answer all of them, but I want to give them a chance, at least as shortly as they can, to say them. And then so that's going to take about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe more, 5 minutes, and then I'll go back to every panelist to have a final word to sum up in a short, pithy few sentences. So, and we'll be out of here in 5 minutes because I hear that there's a drink reception that's calling our name. So there was a question here as succinct as you can make it, and we'll try to get to everyone as well.
Thanks. Isn't this whole discussion about AI really about power? And I go back to the discussion China versus US. And China being a ruthless competitor without scruples, and you mentioned authoritarian capitalism state, which I thought was a great definition. Isn't it really about domination, about who has the best technology, who eventually makes the most money and obviously can spend it in the military, and eventually is who is the dominating power in the 21st century?
Great. There's a woman here.
So mine was actually a quick best practice, which I wanted to share. I work at Amazon, and I've been there for 5.5 years. And every 6 months, the role has been very different. I'm currently managing a P&L, which 12 months ago was managed by 35 people. And all those 34 people that have left have all automated their jobs. And those were in pricing, in marketing, operations, etc. And I think one thing that Amazon has done extremely well with this automation is, while change was very difficult and telling someone that their job will not exist in 2 months' time, switching the mentality to thinking, how can I automate my job? So if you ask our pricing person at Amazon, what is your job? They'll tell you, my job exists because there's a defect in the system. And my job is to automate my job such that I don't have a job in 3 months' time. And so I think there's something really interesting about that switch of mentality of, instead of telling someone your job doesn't exist, it's to incentivize them to help automate their job such that it's done more efficiently.
Didn't Lenin or Trotsky say that a capitalist will sell you the rope with which you hang yourself? That's crazy.
I wouldn't frame it that way, but I think there's and to be honest, the person who used to do forecasting for 4 years, the machine does forecasting so much better. And the same thing with pricing, same thing with so I think it's about switching the mentality of not thinking of it as a bad guy, but how can you help it be part of the change, as well as, to your point, a lot of training, because I think that's a key input. Sorry?
When are you leaving?
Well, actually, as of yesterday, I'm managing a whole P&L that was managed by 30 people before. So probably in 6 months' time, my job won't exist. It is.
You should go into the
in many
insurance
ways.
industry. They need some people who know AI.
Yeah.
Good.
So, sorry, not a question, but just a general comment.
Great, thanks. Show of hands of who else has something to say, and how quickly can you say it? Lightning rounds. You get like 1 sentence. Make your point and pass the mic.
This comes back to the point of, is it more important, or what's more important, technology or implementation? And then also come back to power. Isn't it completely irrelevant where something is invented? In the end, it just matters who rolls it out the fastest, the most aggressive, and the biggest scale. I mean, the solar cell was invented in the West and by American and European researchers, but the biggest producer of solar power is China today. And I think in AI will be the same. It doesn't matter if something's invented in Cambridge or Oxford. In the end, I think China will take it and roll it out the fastest and most aggressive. And then also, yeah, okay. And then come back.
One per person.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Hi, a quick follow-on. How important is hardware in the AI race? AMD, Intel, NVIDIA are US-based. The majority of supercomputers are still in the US. How is that going to influence the race?
What we still haven't talked about is how AI is going to impact the social fabric per se, especially economic disparity, because capitalism breeds AI, which in turn breeds capitalism. The ones who are left out, how does it actually impact them?
Okay. You haven't said anything, so you get the last word. That's the last question. Go for it. Shout it out.
If we can nail the diversity issue properly, is that actually key to competitive advantage against China?
All right, that's a curveball. Okay. You all have basically a final summation, and would like to begin.
It goes back to my earlier point. I think the UK is just a fantastic opportunity in sort of the fourth industrial revolution. Incredible skills, incredible research, credible demand in sectors, financial sector. It's a great opportunity for us in the private and public sector to really have an ambition around AI, and I'd like to see this country really be ambitious.
So I think hardware will be a sort of very fundamental part of the race, and we are at somewhat of a disadvantage there. But I do think, slightly echoing those sentiments, one of the couple of things that London has going for it over perhaps the Bay Area is we have much less competition for talent than in the Bay Area. So there's a much more heterogeneity of like startups. It's much easier to have great people here than it would ever be in San Francisco. And then we're in the real world. So San Francisco, you basically in a bubble, right? They spend all their time with other startups and with other investors. And a great deal, like as a general purpose technology, I think AI should be thought about sort of in the same bucket as like electricity or steam power or computation. And a lot of the applications, at least in the short term, are going to be making other things better. And to do that, you have to know other things, and you have to know other people, and you have to sort of be able to get in contact with other businesses. And that plays to somewhere like London's advantages, where 20 minutes one way I can go and meet Sana, 20 minutes another way I can go and meet the DeepMind guys, 20 minutes another, go to UCL and talk to the academics there. And that is different and unique. So hopefully some of those things will lead to a sort of more interesting ecosystem, even though I don't really believe we've solved the question of why we don't have any tech giants, and I don't see any reason to believe that we're going to solve that over the next sort of 5 or 10 years. So I think we stand to have an interesting small ecosystem more than any hyperscale technology companies.
Steve?
I disagree with that. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're absolutely going to see $25 billion, $50 billion, $100 billion companies in Europe being created. In the year...
So how long? I might wager you on this.
In the decade... Yeah, we should do a bet on this.
Maybe it's your company.
In the decades...
Yeah, excluding my company.
in the decades to 2010 of the companies that were formed in that decade in Europe, there were about half a dozen who got to billion-dollar valuations. In the decade since 2010, there's already been 60. That number's only going in one direction. We had Spotify last year, which was $20 billion. I think it's absolutely going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. We are an AI powerhouse from the research point of view, from the talent point of view, from the company formation point of view as well. There's as much entrepreneurial activity and company formation in Europe as there is anywhere that I've seen in the world, including having spent time in Silicon Valley. We are slightly behind on, not now on seed capital, but we are slightly behind on growth capital. I expect that problem will get solved in the next 5 to 10 years. It had better get solved, and I think the governments and others will have a role to play in getting it solved, because otherwise it's definitely true that the Chinese are coming and trying to buy our AI. $150 billion a year being deployed, a lot of that coming into Europe to do these sorts of deals. And I think that diversity, to the 2 points earlier, is an enormous opportunity for us, one which certainly the American giants have not solved, despite trying very hard to solve it for at least 10 years.
Sana?
So I'm an optimist. I'm absolutely an eternal optimist. I think these technologies are going to make a massive positive difference for the world. I'm also a bit, I believe in humanity, and I do think that there is a point at which we need to stop thinking about this as a competitive advantage and start thinking about how we can come together to solve the big global challenges using these technologies like major weather fronts, like healthcare, which is, it just cannot be ignored. The ability of these technologies to make proper changes. There's also massive things that are happening in the world. So other than climate change, we have a massive aging population here in Europe, on the east as well. And these are challenges that are affecting China as much as they're affecting here the West. And I think these are things where, again, there is a willingness to work together to figure out. And so I find it interesting to think about some of the new challenges that we're going to face, some of the shortage of where work is, and I pose that challenge back to society to start changing the rhetoric and the way that we value our care workers, and the way that we speak about jobs like that require empathy, that in the future are going to be really important for us to cherish and reward properly.
Good, thank you. I'm going to take a crack at a final summation as well, which is this, that we know the value, and we've seen the research come through just in the last decade on cognitive diversity, about how you have groups with lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds and lots of different ways of thinking, and how they outperform other groups that are more homogeneous. And I think the same thing's going to happen with AI. We're going to find that AI, it's going to expose itself, its limitations more and more, and that it needs humans to pull out the best in it. And I think the world is going to have a sort of cognitive diversity with these tools and with people. We have a role after all. Thanks a lot.